and scolding, she says, "How can you do this to attract the others? How are you going to the office in such a confused state? How do you work in such a confused state?" That is what she remarked at her husband. Exasperation is not anger. Neither she was angry, nor she was waiting for any answer or anybody else to answer. But she herself had to continue with that statement. "But I'm afraid it is so. I always have catastrophes when I travel." So this is that admittance that he gives. And he says, "Well, it is always so with me. I always end up messing things if I have anything in my hand." And he says that these catastrophes, these falls and these unwanted incidents do keep happening with me. I leaned over to tie a shoelace. Just at that moment, someone in the seat ahead of me threw his seat back into full recline and found myself pinned helplessly in the crash position. Now this incident he gives as an example. He says, "Once I was seated in my seat and I bent down to tie my shoelace. Suddenly, the person in the front seat pushed back his seat, and in that reclining position, in that leaning position, that seat, the front seat, crushed me into that bending position. And as he was trying to come up to his seat in an upright manner, it became difficult for him. So what he had to do was, he had to take the support, he had to take the help of the person sitting next to him. He had to hold on to his feet and then come upright to his seat. And found myself pinned helplessly in the crash position." So you must have understood this crash position, that he has bent down to tie the lace and the front seat comes back onto his body and crashes him down into his seat. It was only by clawing the leg of the man sitting next to me that I managed to get myself freed. So how did he free himself? By clawing on to the feet of that person sitting next to him. Clawing means holding on to the feet of the person next to him. And with his help, with the help of his feet and with the help of his own wit, he could sit up straight back into his seat. And therefore he says that whatever work I take up in my hand messes up, and I am a center of attraction for everybody. Then he gives an example of another day. On another occasion, when he was flying, I knocked a soft drink onto the lap of a sweet lady sitting beside me. The flight attendant came and cleaned her up and brought me a replacement drink. And instantly I knocked that also onto the woman again. To this day, I don't know how I did it. I just remember reaching out for the new drink and watching helplessly as my arm, like some cheap prop in those 1950s horror movies with a name like The Unleaded Limb, violently swept the drink from its perch and onto her lap. So what example he gives here is that once he was traveling in a plane and the drink was brought by one of the air hostesses or probably attendant in the plane. And as he was picking up that juice glass, it tripped and the whole of that juice fell on the clothes of the lady who was sitting beside him. The lady was cleaned up, her clothes were cleaned by another attendant, and another drink was brought for this Bill Bryson, the one who was traveling. But again, as I told you, that he was in such a confused state that he doesn't know when he picked up the glass from the tray, and suddenly again the same, the second time also, the juice fell onto that same lady, and he was now quite in an embarrassed condition. He says that it appeared to be miraculous. He says, as it happens in the horror films, some miracle happens in horror films, similar was the case with him, that he held on to the glass, but somehow it tilted from his hand and the juice was all on that lady. That is why he calls himself an accidental tourist, because whenever he is touring, whenever he is in the plane or anywhere that he travels, things mess up wherever he is. The lady looked at me with stupefied expression you would expect to receive from someone whom you have repeatedly drenched, and uttered an oath that started with O, finished with sake, and in between had some words that I had never heard uttered in public before, certainly not by a nun. So he explains over here that that lady who was drenched with juice twice, she put a curse onto me. She spoke some bad words towards me. She looked at me in such an expression to show to me that I was acting in a very stupid manner. Stupefied expression refers to working in such a manner which disturbs the other person. And she had started the curse with the word O and ended with that word sake. So he says obviously that the lady sitting beside me would have really cursed me a lot, because it was because of me that twice her dress had got wet with that juice. This, however, was not my worst experience on a plane flight. My worst experience was when I was writing important thoughts in a notebook. For example, buy socks, clutch drinks carefully, etc., sucking thoughtfully onto the end of my pen as you do, and fell into conversation with an attractive young lady in the next seat. I amused her for perhaps 20 minutes with a scattering of urbane beaux mots, then retired to the lavatory, where I discovered that the pen had leaked and that my mouth, chin, tongue, teeth and the gums were now striking scrub-resistant navy blue and would remain so for several days. So here he comes up with another example.